everyone, and welcome to our July 2016 customer webinar. Today is all about speed. Christine Masters, our Director of Product Management, will discuss the importance of making sure your site loads quickly, show you how to identify ads and third-party add-ons that might be impacting your load times, and demonstrate how page size budgets can help you stay on track when adding new content. She'll also highlight upcoming changes to BLOX CMS that are aimed at keeping load times in check. I'm Paige Rubin, Marketing Specialist at townnews.com. In the room, we also have Teresa Nelson, Director of Business Development. Today, we'll cover the formal presentation in about 30 minutes, after which we'll take questions. At any point during the presentation, you can type in a question into the chat box, but we'll hold off on answering them until the end of the show. So with that, I'll pass it off to Christine. Take it away.
Great, thank you. So to kind of get started today, I just wanted to briefly talk about why we're doing this webinar. I'm really excited about this. We get a lot of questions from people about, why is my site slow or how I can speed up my site. And I'm really hoping that I'm actually going to be a little bit more technical than we are in some of these webinars, because I really want to get to the nitty-gritty of how to look at your site and think of it for speed, some processes on how you can evaluate your site, monitor it going forward, and really I'm hoping to give you some tools to better make decisions on how you can actually, again, consider your site for speed. And then obviously I'll talk about some of the stuff that we at Town News are doing in order to, improve your site and help your site be as fast as humanly possible. So I'm going to start off, and this is pretty obvious. I don't think that anybody will give me too much of an argument about why speed is important, but I do want to go through this to really emphasize to you just really how important it is. So the number one thing, and you'll see this all over the internet, is that speed is important because it is possibly the number one most important thing for your users. It is one of the biggest factors in usability. There's a lot of examples of sites out there. Craigslist is kind of an older example where people in the beginning just liked it because it was so much faster and so much simpler, and that was something that people took into consideration. So it's definitely one of the biggest things for usability. Even if your site isn't the best looking site ever or has all of the flashiest things on it, users really appreciate speed. There's a couple different studies out there that talk about how basically the impact of speed on usability and on users. The one that I really wanted to highlight, and I do this a couple times throughout this webinar, is this one by Aberdeen Group. There's a couple of them out there. There's a really good one by Kissmetrics, another one from Gomez.com, that talks about essentially the impact of speed on page abandonment rates. And so I'm using this as an example that what they found is that a 1 second increase in page load time tends to drop page views, so increase page abandonment rate by 11%, which is an incredible number. That means that if your site was 5 seconds and you add something to your site that takes an additional 1 second to load on that site, just 1 second, you could potentially lose 10% of page views. Now, there's a lot of variables in that calculation to consider, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's something that I'm really going to emphasize throughout this webinar, is just to think about things. You might not even be able to notice that 1 second delay when you're loading the page. You probably have a relatively fast connection. You might not notice that once you add a couple widgets or a couple blocks to your site on the front page, but your users and your data analytics will notice it. So that's something to keep thinking about. This is a graph, again, by Kissmetrics that I think shows the increase in page abandonment as your load time gets higher. So as you can see here, that we're talking about just a 4 per second load time. On average, they found that you lose 25% of your visitors as they come to the site, it's too slow to load, and they leave. Obviously, a lot of our sites actually are in the 10-second to 12-second range, and we are, of course, are not seeing 100% page abandonment rate, so there is a level off. Also, obviously, as the news is less of a, if it's specific to your site or it's important news, they might stay longer for that page to load. But this is something just to consider, that having a faster site over time can drastically increase your page views. So something to consider there. And study after study shows yet again that speed is even more important to mobile users than it is to desktop users. Number one, they a lot of times are on a slower connection than they are on desktop, but they have higher expectations for speed on mobile, which is sort of unfair if you think about it, but that's the way things are. One study, again by Kissmetrics, showed that 46% of mobile users said that they would abandon a page after 10 seconds. Again, a lot of our sites are actually in that 10-second range, so that is a pretty remarkable number for us to think about. And again, one of the things that is very interesting to us here at Town News, that our traffic as a whole across all of our sites, and I think it's pretty much the beginning of 2016, has now moved over to more mobile traffic than desktop traffic. And I'm talking about phones. 50% of Town News traffic is on mobile phones, and about 10% is on tablets. So you can do the math that if you add tablets and phones together, we're talking about 60% of our traffic is on mobile devices, which is amazing. So this is something that definitely consider, that as traffic moves over to mobile, there is a higher expectation of speed on your site. Another thing to consider is that speed is very important for search engines. Google is probably the most aggressive campaigner for speed of most of the internet companies out there. They are very aggressively pursuing strategies to help sites on the internet increase page load times. They are now including page load time in SEO, and both for a positive boost for sites that load quickly, as well as a negative boost for sites that load very slowly. They have it as a ranking metric in both of those. I will say that at this point in time, as far as the SEO world can tell, there isn't a huge boost for faster sites in Google PageRank at this point. From what we know, it's about one of 200 different metrics that Google considers in PageRank, but it is one of them. So anything, I know a lot of people asked us about how I can improve my SEO. Speed is one of them. Look at your site speed and keep it as fast as possible will help Google consider your site to be higher in terms of PageRank. Also, they now have a mobile-friendly label in search results that highlights things that are optimized for mobile and optimized for mobile speed. So that is something that theoretically can improve your usability for users who are looking at the Google search results in mobile. So they are able to more easily identify sites that will work on the mobile phone and will be fast on their mobile phone. And another cool key thing that Google has done is a couple years ago they released their page speed tool, which can analyze your site for the types of things that you're doing on the site and will tell you essentially a grade of how your site is performing in speed. So this is something that we'll get into this a little bit more towards the end of the webinar. We'll actually look at a couple of page speed reports and talk about how to interpret them and some of the important factors that you can look at in that page speed report. But those are all things that, again, are very important to consider when you're talking about speed, is that speed is important for users and speed is important for Google. One more thing about how important it is to Google, I found a couple of quotes that Google has talked about. They really feel that for their business, one of their main goals is to improve the speed of the entire internet, essentially. They really feel, obviously, that if sites are faster, more people click on the sites, more people use their search engine, more people see Google DFP ads and AdSense ads, and that's where they're making a lot of their money. So they want more people clicking on more things and more people using the internet, and they really see speed as being a predominant factor in the usability for users across the internet. So just one quick example that Marissa Meyer, when she worked at Google before she moved to Yahoo a couple years ago, was talking about an experiment they did on the Google search results site. They actually did a survey of their users asking, and I can't remember the exact number, it was something like, would you prefer to see 20 results on the Google results page or 35 results on the Google results page? And overwhelmingly, the users said that they wanted 35 results because then they can see more things on the page. So Google actually switched to see 35 results, which increased their page load time by something like 200 milliseconds, and they saw a 20% loss in page views. And they turned it off, and they saw a 20% increase in page views. So you have to consider that when a user is in the midst of searching for a good restaurant for tonight, that their use of the system increases the faster it is. Because, okay, I'm going to search for this, I'm going to make a quick change, I'm going to make another change, I'm going to make another change, okay, I found it and I'm leaving. Whereas if those things don't take milliseconds to do, they end up waiting and then they just do one search and they leave. So this is important for the whole internet, and obviously it's really important for news and other media sites as well. So now I'm going to talk about a couple of things that you can do to speed up your site. So the first thing that I think that this is kind of a new idea, so I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about this, is I've really been recommending to users to think about a page load and time goal, or I call it a budget for your site. Now you have to kind of consider what is important to you, how fast you can go, and how much you can scale back your site, and then set that as a goal, and then attempt to stick to that goal over time. You can have different goals for your front page versus your index page versus your article page. Obviously, your article page sees a lot more traffic, and those types of users that are coming in from search and coming in from social services directly to an article page will have higher expectations for speed. So I would recommend that your article page be the fastest you can possibly go. But try to consider having a goal, a budget for these that you can evaluate over time. So just as an example, let's say, now this is a very aggressive example that I'm using, but this is my personal pretend flex site that I have is at about, my front page is about 2.75 seconds load time, and I think it's under 2 megabytes in terms of size. So that's kind of my budget for my front page. And what happens in theory if your ad director comes to you and says, I would like to put this weather video from Vimeo on the front page, we're going to get $200 a month from an advertiser to put this on the front page. So obviously when I put that on my front page, that is going to increase the time that it takes for my front page to load, and it increases the size of that front page as well. So I can look at that and say, okay, if I add this in here, I'm going to have to remove something else from the page in order to stick to my budget, or we're not going to be able to put that on the front page. Maybe it can go on the front page because I can afford it on the front page, it's within my budget, but you can't have it on every single article page. And these just kind of give you tools and discussion points that you can talk about within your organization as you're discussing the types of things to put on the front page and the types of things to put on the index page versus the article page. Another good example would be a Facebook widget. The social media editor at your paper really wants to have the Facebook widget on as many pages as possible because he wants to get more likes and more followers on his page, and then to get more engagement from users and to get more followers, which is a great idea and which works really well. but that particular widget takes 1 to 2 seconds of page load time. So again, we're looking at, on average, you could be spending 20% of your page views on that widget. That might be worth it because you gain lots of followers and you get more usability, but you might determine that, you know what, I don't think that's worth it, and I'm just going to put a logo on the front page that links off to Twitter for almost no page load increase. So again, everything should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. It should be looked at on how big and how much JavaScript images increase it takes to add that widget or that external service to your page. And then each of those things can be considered on a case-by-case basis, the revenue that it brings, the usability and the page views that it brings versus what you quote-unquote spend on page load time and page load size. So hopefully that makes sense. I've got a couple other tools to talk about, again, in terms of setting goals and monitoring those goals. I'm going to get into this a little bit at the end of the webinar, but I just wanted to mention this quickly here. I'm going to show you kind of a live example of, again, my example Flex site that I have and what this looks like in real life. But essentially, one of the tools that whenever somebody sends us a ticket and says, how can I improve my site? Why is my site so slow? This is one of the first things that we look at is using Chrome's dev tools. And you go to essentially the network tab up here, you can actually watch, and you essentially reload the page, and you can watch all of the items load on the page. What I like to do is I sort by size or time, and then I can see the elements that are the slowest and the biggest on my page. The other thing that's really important to look at when you're looking at page, the dev tools, is the total amount transferred. There might be other metrics that you can look at to gauge the quote-unquote size of the page, but I look at the total amount transferred and then the time it takes for the DOM to be loaded, which is what the user experiences as the page is loaded. There might be other elements on the page that are still loading asynchronously or that might lazy load as you scroll down the page, but this time, the DOM content loaded time is basically what the user will experience as it's loaded and I can start messing around with stuff. So those are two things that I like to look at to gauge whether I'm following my budget. And so again, I'm trying to stick below 2 megabytes and below 2 seconds for my front page, and this is kind of where I'm trying to see if I add a new widget to my page, I'll run the DevTools network option and see it increased to 2.75 seconds. Okay, that's above my 2-second rule, so I need to look at either removing something else or moving that widget off. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to show you again at the end of the webinar. I'll show you a kind of a more specific example of that and show you that in live practice. We also use a couple of other tools here at Town News. 3 that we wanted to mention was webpagetest.org, gtmetrics with an x.com, and Pingdom. All of these are external services that will help you. Some of them provide additional tools that are more in-depth or more visual than Chrome's DevTool plugin. They also offer services that you can configure them. GTmetrix, which I'll show you in a couple minutes, actually allows you to make a video of your page loading so you can see what a user sees on a slower connection, and you can see how your page loads over time. It might be that your DOM content loaded is 1.8 seconds, but you want to try to get something on the top of the page in a sub 1 second time frame. That's actually a recommendation from Google. So you can actually watch a video on GTmetrix of how your site loads and at what it looks like at each second throughout the time load process. So it's very interesting. And again, you can set these up with alerts. So if your site starts loading very slowly or starts loading, in slower than your 2 or 3 or 5 second time frame, it can send you an alert saying something's going on with your site. and that will let you know that there's possibly traffic problems, or it could be that something's wrong with the site, that there's a new widget or there's something that's loading incorrectly, an ad that is not correct, that will actually give you an alert, and you can actually go and look at that and see what the problems are. So those are some really excellent tools that that we would really recommend, and then to monitor this over time and keep up to date over time on this. So I'm going to show you this at the end separately, but I just wanted to talk about this quickly now. I built and I don't know, I'd like to get feedback from you all on how useful this is, but I think this is a really good tool for users inside of a newsroom to evaluate essentially the costs of adding a new widget or a new integration to your page. So I'm just going to use this as a really quick example, and for the sake of math, I'm just using a lot of rounded numbers here. But let's pretend your site has 100,000 page views, and you calculated your revenue per page at $10. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can calculate your revenue per page. One really easy way is to take your total revenue per month and then divide it by your page views, and then that's your revenue per page. Or you can be a little bit more detailed and go through and say, we're talking about an article page, and on the article page I have 4 ads, and they have an average of $3 CPM, plus I have a widget at the top of the page which is a $3 CPM. So then I'm talking about a $15 revenue per page for that one single page. So however you calculate that, it is actually a really good idea to have that number for your site. This actually, by the way, can be very useful to know your revenue per page number, because if you're making other decisions, such as I'm going to put up a paywall, you can say, let's say we lose 30% of our traffic due to adding the paywall. You can estimate that I'm going to get X number of dollars based on subscriptions, and you can calculate how much revenue you're losing based on the loss of page views that adding a paywall would cause. So there's a couple of different things here that this number is useful for, but in this calculation, let's say that it's $10 RPM. Then you can calculate that the new widget or integration that you want to add will cost 1 second in page load time. So we know that every 1 second we're looking at about a 10% decline in page views. So that's 10,000 pages theoretically that you lose by adding that new widget. So your cost based on the 10% decline, 10,000 pages, $10 per page per 1,000 is about $100. So if you're going to get additional, you estimate 30,000 pages because of how awesome this widget is, then it's a win, right? That's a good idea to put the widget on the page. You should put that widget on the page and subtract something else. If you are getting $50 from an advertiser to put that widget on the page, you're probably ending up losing money because you're paying, hypothetically, $100 to have that widget on the page. Hopefully that makes sense. I know that's a little bit complicated. And again, I'm going to show you the tool that I built in a couple of minutes. It's just a Google spreadsheet that you can copy and download that will allow you to just input these as variables and see the cost at the end. So one thing that's obviously very important to talk about in terms of page load time is ads. A lot of times on our sites, ads are one of the top things that will take time to load on your page, and because obviously ads equal revenue, that's an important thing to factor in. So we're never going to recommend not to run ads on your site or not to use programmatic ads or any kind of those types of ads in your site, but think about it and do it responsibly. But here's a couple of tricks and ideas to think about as you're considering page speed and having a mix of increase in page speed versus how many ads are on your site. So the first thing is, there's a lot of discussion now about ad blockers, and that a lot of users are starting to employ ad blockers because ads slow down the page a lot. And the IAB organization for advertising has kind of come out with some new principles on what to look at when you're creating and working with ad networks. And they've come out with these lean principles that the ads should be light, very fast loading, encrypted so there's no security issues, ad choice supported. So ad choice is a program where a user can see how you're being targeted to how this ad is being targeted to you, and what it's doing on the page and why it's on the page. And then obviously non-invasive ads that don't cover up content, ads that don't inject themselves or try to trick the user into clicking on them. So those are all things that the IAB has identified as important principles to consider when you're looking at your ad strategy. An additional thing to mention very quickly is flash ads. We don't have too many sites that are still using flash ads, but Chrome actually, in the last couple of months, has started a path of very much reducing support for flash ads. Now, in the latest version of Chrome, this is actually a couple months old now, they no longer auto-play the flash ads on the page. They call it that they only will autoplay important, quote-unquote, important content, which means non-advertising content. And so users will see essentially a still shot of your flash animation with the option to quote-unquote play it. They have like a play button on it. So this obviously is very non-ideal for a page curl ad or some kind of a flash video type ad. So those are things that we would definitely encourage to move to HTML5. It's faster, it loads better, it has better support, it's more mobile friendly, and it works better. So, and I know it's more difficult to do, and you might have a Flash designer on staff, but there's a couple different tools out there for how to use the same sort of design process, but export it to an HTML5 ad instead. And lastly, just consider, how many ads you have on the page, how many programmatic versus local ads you have on the page. Try to have a good mix for that. There's some ad networks have, AdSense is a good example of one that's pretty strict. AdSense, you can only have 3 AdSense ads on the page. You can't stack them all together. So that's something that you can look at. You can't have more ads than content. That's another thing that they have as some of their rules. And if they see that you are violating these rules, and they'll send you a violation notice, and if you don't address the notice, then you could get banned from AdSense, which is very difficult to undo. So those are all things to look at in terms of how many ads you have on the page, and how much time you're spending, downloading those ads versus the content on your page. So, you don't want to hurt some of your advertisers by having a rail of 21 ads down the side. That might not be good for your programmatic ads or your local advertisers. So, and again, this is all a case-by-case basis. There are times when, it's definitely worth it to add this ad or that ad, and those all need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. But look at them in terms of the holistic goals of your entire site. And the other thing that I think is very important for a lot of our sites is to look at third-party integrations and the ads that they might load or that might be loaded, and how many trackers are added based on the widgets that you might be adding to your site. I've seen a couple different sites, and I'm just going to give kind of it's sort of a stupid example, but let's say there's a ski widget that you got for free from a weather site, and this particular ski widget automatically updates with all of the I don't know, mountain, snow inches or whatever that is that people who skis care about, how many inches of snow there is. And, this is something that is free. They offer it for free. It's got a really cool animation of a guy going down a hill, whatever. You put it on your site. You think it looks really cool. Unfortunately, it adds 10 trackers to your site. All of those trackers, and this is kind of an example. This isn't a BLOX site, but it's a fairly well-known news site on the internet. This is just an example, and it's even cut off. There's a bunch more down here. This is only at the T's, it's alphabetical. These are all the trackers that are loaded on this site from all the different widgets and integrations and ads they have on their page. Each of these has access to all of the data that you have on your site in terms of your user behavior, the cookies that are set on your site, what those users are doing, any kind of information that you have on your site. They have 100% access to that, and they can actually, and many of them do, take this data and resell it in the data marketplace. We actually had some partners that we used to work with that we had on some of our BLOX sites that would essentially take data from the BLOX site and resell it in the data marketplace to advertisers who are looking at targeting ads to advertisers who do certain things. So this is definitely something to look at. Each of these trackers slows down your site and puts your data at risk for that they can access it and sell it. Especially if you're in our Town News IQ program, which essentially is a way for you to track your own users and really own your data, and then you can use that data to target ads and increase the CPM effectiveness of your ads. Especially if you're in that program where you are making a really good use of your data, you don't want to share your data with other people if you can. So that ski widget, the reason why it's free is because they're actually monitoring the traffic on your site, monitoring what those people are doing and the behaviors that they have, and then reselling that on the marketplace, and that's how they essentially pay for their free widget, the hypothetical widget that probably doesn't exist. But this is a really good thing to think about is, there are some services out there that are free and they provide a good service, and it might be okay for them to have access to your data because you think that it's worth it, and you think that you might, for example, know that they're not reselling it, which is fine, or they're using it for other purposes. But it's something that you should consider, and you should know on your site, this is what these things are doing, and this is what they're using that data for. Again, your data is one of the most important things that you have on your site to make money, to target ads, to monitor over time. And so you want to be responsible about who you are sharing that data with. So the tool that I used here in order to see all the different trackers that are loaded on the site is called Ghostery. And it's just a Chrome extension that you can download. And what I did is for a couple of weeks, I actually turned it on just as I looked from site to site throughout, just my regular life. And going to CNN or MSNBC and just seeing the number of trackers that they have on their sites versus some other sites that might be more conservative about their trackers, it's really interesting to see. And then of course the most important site is your own, to see what you have going on there and whether or not you know who they are and who you're sharing at. It's worth noting that if you're using something like Google DFP and AdX or AdSense, that they load ads from external servers, and those external servers might include their own trackers, who then might include other trackers. So a lot of times you can see, with ads, you'll have a lot more trackers, and then without ads, you might have a lot less trackers. So that's something to keep in mind. And you can kind of test that out by going to a URL on your site that has no ads on it and then seeing what all your trackers are. And then that's kind of your baseline for what are these trackers doing on my site. You're not going to necessarily know every single tracker that all the ads are loading, and that's fine. But again, it's just a matter of knowing what's on your site and knowing what's out there. I would also recommend that going back to the the Chrome Dev Tools to load Chrome Dev Tools and sort by time, and again, and you can, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll see that some of the external JavaScripts that you've loaded on your page are some of the slowest services on your site, and that's something, again, that you should consider when working with that external company. If you're adding a example.com video to your front page, but that example.com video adds 4 seconds of load time to your site, is that worth it in the grand scheme of how fast you want your site to load, and do you have the budget for it within the goals that you set previously? All right, so now I get to the point where I want to talk about how Town News can help you with your performance. We do a ton of stuff, and we're actually, one of our big goals this year is to try to increase performance as much as we can, and we're always working on, trying to improve performance, and I'll talk about that. But I do want to keep this in context. When I'm talking about my example site where I don't use a lot of external services, I'm using BLOX ads and BLOX images on my site. My site is loading in about 2 seconds. So you can kind of imagine that if Town News does an incredibly stellar job and increases our page load time by 25% of the things that Town News itself can affect, that means that an example kind of default blocks page will go from 2 seconds, and they'll basically save 500 milliseconds on their site time. So when you're working in an environment where there's a lot of external services that Town News cannot affect, you're loading a lot of Facebook widgets and external widgets and trackers and external services and integration with third parties. None of those things we have any effect on, and so the 200 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds that we might be able to shave off of by spending $1 million on hardware infrastructure improvements is not going to necessarily be noticeable in the grand scheme of things on your site. So I just wanted to set expectations out there in terms of what we have the ability to do here. That being said, we are working as hard as we possibly can to get that couple hundred milliseconds that we can. So I'll talk about the things that we're doing. First off, this year we've actually been working directly with Google on ways that we can improve performance for our website. So Google has a couple of different ideas and metrics that they look at, and I'll talk about one here. They call it the Rail performance model, which talks about the responsiveness of your site. And by responsiveness there, I'm talking about that when the user performs an action, it gives them an instantaneous feedback that they did something. That way when they click on something, it starts to load, or when they open a tab, it does something. So it feels like the site is responsive to you. Also, animation. This is just talking about essentially kind of the same thing, to have animations that help usability throughout the site. Idle time, one of their recommendations is to utilize idle time in order to do preloads or in order to download additional content while they're reading or while they're doing other things. And so there's a couple different things that we're looking at for that. And then obviously load time. Load time is a very important part of that, and they have a couple of recommendations there. So we actually are working with Google on this. They've worked with us to identify some things that we can improve. We've actually, and I'll talk about this in a second, we've actually done several releases that have worked on some of their recommendations and other things internally that we've identified. And so this is something that we're working really hard on. The other thing that I'll mention is Google is very interested in Google Accelerated Mobile Pages, or Google AMP. This is their version of kind of Facebook Instant Articles, which is a version of the page that has very, very restricted code. They don't have a lot of external widgets. They don't allow a lot of external JavaScript. Everything's hosted on Google, so it's as fast as humanly possible. And we have built-in integration for Google AMP that is now live. So if you're interested in about that, feel free to send us, you can search through our documentation or send us a ticket on that. But this is something that this is one of their initiatives to improve speed as much as possible by doing this kind of this alternate page for Google AMP. Another thing that we've been working on for a couple of years now is our Flex templates. These have been optimized from the start to be as fast as possible. We've done a lot of things in order to improve the site speed for these. We have icons that we use, font icons instead of images, which really decreases the size of pages. We have reorganized the loading priority so that pages load faster and appear to load faster, which is, again, a really important thing. And we actually are continuing. We have a couple additional metrics that we're looking at in terms of how the page loads. We are using Bootstrap Fast CSS framework to improve download time and how pages are styled. We actually have a relatively sophisticated image loading module that will auto size based on the size of the page and the size of the viewport, so that you're not loading a 1200 pixel wide image on a mobile phone. We do a lot of work in that regard, and we actually are still working on a couple of additional initiatives related to that. Now on our system templates for Flex, we actually are automatically compressing and zipping up the JavaScript and CSS files. It's called basically a minification process that makes them less readable but faster loading. We are doing this automatically. And we actually have now, with our new system templates, faster rollouts and rollbacks so that if there are any problems, we can see it instantaneously and we can roll back instantaneously. So this is something that these system templates are different than some of the original templates that we first rolled out with Flex. And one of the main reasons why we're doing this is so that we have more control over how those pages are built and how they're served, and we can do things like minifying the JavaScript and CSS automatically. Some things that we're working on for the future for our system templates for Flex, we actually are adding the capability of having a separate sidebar for article pages, which means that, again, if you want to have that ski widget on the front page, you don't have to put that on your article pages as well. And that's something that you can have a different sidebar on your article pages so that you can get the fastest, most streamlined, mobile-friendly version of the article page that you can. We are actually working on ways to fix inline CSS that is added by blocks. We're improving the site rendering. I want to talk about this for just 1 second. This is important because the way the page looks as it downloads is as important as how fast it is. So you want to try to get a page that looks like your page as quickly as possible loading. Google's recommended time is sub 1 second. You want that top of the page, top of the fold to be loaded and to be the correct size and everything to be loaded correctly. So we're actually working on some additional features to improve site rendering, speeding up time for breaking news and caching issues. And then again, through our system templates, we're working on ways to automatically merge and optimize core files so that there's less HTTP requests and less things loaded. And just a quick mention, we can't really talk about speed and all the things Town News does to improve speed without talking about our hardware infrastructure. We really have amazing world-class hardware infrastructure and servers at Town News. We actually just spent $1.3 million in this year alone in upgrades and additional equipment on our 2 data centers in New York and Chicago. We also have a lot of performance monitoring and for both software and hardware, and ways that we can watch how the page is loading and any changes that we make through our software and through our templates and what effect that has on page performance. We monitor that and we're able to, react to that and make changes and upgrades based on that. We have upgraded our load balancers and load optimization so that's more efficient and actually has improved by, again, a couple of milliseconds in terms of the page load time. And we've actually are working with a couple of different CDN network, content delivery network providers to improve our CDN. So that's some really great stuff that we're doing there. And all of that, has been helping you in the background. So now I'm going to go really quickly to this quick demo here. This is my page load estimator that I talked about previously that is just a little calculator that I built. If you go to the link that is in the webinar, and we'll have this in the notes afterwards, and if you have a question about it, you can email cmasters@townnews.com. But essentially, this is just a little calculator that we built in Google Spreadsheets that allows you to put in variables for your specific site and then see the estimated impact they have. So in this example, I have 1 million page views per month. I've estimated that my RPM for my site, the revenue per page, is $10. The new item that I either want to integrate with or a widget is 1 second. And the percentage of decline is at about 10%. So previously we talked about 11%. That's the estimate out there, but I'm just putting 10 in here to be a little conservative. It actually multiplies things out at a 0.9 basis. So this is actually a little bit of a conservative estimate. The number of page views that I would lose based on that 1 second widget is 100,000. And then based on my RPM, that's $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year that I'm losing. So that's an incredible number for a 1 second delay, right? And again, you can come in here and change these numbers a little bit. If you want to be more conservative with your page decline number, you can change the percentage here. Obviously, there's a slope as this goes up. Obviously the math is that if there's a widget that's 12 seconds loading time, you're not going to lose 120% of your traffic. So there's a point where it levels off. But this is something that hopefully is a tool that you can use in your newsroom just to see if, adding that new video widget is 4 seconds to your page, and you can see how much money that relates to in terms of your revenue over time based on your RPM. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there. Definitely let me know if this works for you, or if you have any questions about the math, or if you notice any problems with this. I'd like some feedback on it. But I think that this is something that you can use internally. Again, when you go to this page, what I would do is just make a copy of it for yourself. You'll see it when you first go there. It'll be a view-only mode. So make a copy, and then you'll be able to change all of these different values and then do some calculations yourself. Another really quick thing I wanted to show you live was, this is the flex-showcase.blockcms.com site. This is my test site. It is a default Flex site running BLOX ads. So you can see that there's actually, I do have a bunch of ads on the page. It's not an unrealistic site. But you can see on here again, in terms of the load time. Now, I've actually had this online for a while, so the finish time is a long time, but you can see 1.1 megabytes transferred, and then my load time 240. So again, if I added an additional widget to that and it went up to 340, then I would know the impact that widget had on my site, and I might want to either delete something else or not add that new widget to my front page. Another really quick thing, this gtmetrics.com site. Again, I'm running this on the Flex Showcase site, which is just a default Flex site with not a lot of external services. And you can see that default BLOX has a pretty good score when we're looking at how it scores in terms of page speed and how it scores with YSlow, which is another service that will monitor how your site is performing. I do want to make a really quick note about how these particular services work. You can see on here that there's a couple of things that I'm getting an F score. One of the things that it gives me an F score for is, for example, the query parameters for our image resizing. It's assuming that because there is a question mark in the URL, it is not cached, but that actually is not the case. We do cache our images. It doesn't know that, so it might not give us a fair score for a couple of these items. But that's fine, because you can kind of look at with a default block site without a lot of external things, with ads, we're getting a 95% page score and a B from YSlow. If you're getting an F and a D, you should look at the external services that you're using on your site. You should be able to get closer to B's and C's on these numbers, if not higher. Again, this is just a default Flex site, a starting point for you to use, and then as you add additional things, you can monitor them here. And I think that's it. Let me go back to our webinar here and let Paige do the review. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Christine. Great job. Just some main points to keep in mind. Users may leave your site if they feel it takes too long to load, and speed doesn't just affect user satisfaction. It also contributes to your SEO. Switching to our Flex templates is a great way to reduce your load time, as well as being mindful of your site's widgets and ads. And don't forget to create page size and load time budgets to help you stay on track. Looks like we've gotten a handful of questions, so let's go ahead and get started with those. First question is, how much does bandwidth cost, and what are the ramifications of looping a video so when a reader goes to the home page, the video is in motion instead of needing to be played?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact pricing on what the bandwidth would be for that, but I can say that obviously having a video on the front page that automatically downloads and or automatically plays would significantly increase your page size and the loading time of that page, obviously. It could be something that it might be 10 or 15 megabytes. So out of my 2 megabyte budget that I have on my site, adding a 10 megabyte video would obviously not be possible. Again, you might look at that in terms of how much money you're getting from that autoplay video or how much usability you're getting from it, but depending on what your page budget is, a lot of times that would be out of the budget. But again, you could put that on a test page, judge a before and after on terms of the page size and page download time, determine the size and the impact of that widget, and then make a choice based on that. And yes, obviously, if you increase your bandwidth significantly, sites pay for their bandwidth, and then that would increase the amount of bandwidth that you pay, depending on if it's going an overage, depending on how much budget you have with Town News for that. It could cost you in actual money as well if you're going over your allotted amount for bandwidth.
Okay, next question. When you show videos that are on YouTube, does that use up bandwidth monetarily?
It does not. The video would be played from YouTube, so that's essentially using YouTube's bandwidth. However, it does increase somewhat your page size, and it would increase your time in terms of how that page loads. So again, that's another point where if you're doing a video embed for your front page from YouTube, do a snapshot of your page size and load time before, and then add the widget and look at it afterwards and see the impact of that widget on your site and whether or not that's worth it to you to have that video on your article pages or on your front page. Now, obviously, adding a video to a single article page it is a good thing for usability and the type of thing that we would obviously recommend. But adding a video to the right rail of your articles that shows up on every page, that's something that you would want to look at on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, this isn't a question, it's just a nice comment, so I'm going to go ahead and share that. Love the more technical webinar. I could even see you guys doing an overview / new type feature webinar and a technical one each month. So thank you for that. We love that kind of feedback. So I'll just move along to the next question now. How many of the site optimization fixes will we as developers be able to make with template access?
So in terms of the last grouping of things that I talked about, all of those things are things that we would be able to do, that we do as Town News on our system templates. I would just mention very quickly, and I kind of touched on this before, but make sure that you're on Flex. So if you're not on Flex already, I would highly definitely advise you to look at the Flex templates, talk to your sales rep, talk to whoever you need, and try to get over onto those Flex templates. They are much better for usability, much better for speed, and virtually no downside essentially for that. We had a couple of people say that you can't put as many ads on Flex as you can on the Zen templates. That's not true. You can put as thousands of ads on your page if you want to. You don't want to, but it's technically possible. So there's no limit to ads or anything that you can put in. In fact, it's actually easier because you can add a block as an ad to your site and put them wherever you need to. So you can really optimize the placement of ads and where you want to put them. So that's not an issue. Definitely look at Flex templates. And then again, we are actually have rolled out now Flex system templates where we actually do a better installation of those templates. Almost all live Flex sites are now on our system templates. So if you want to send us an email, if you're not sure if you're on system templates or not, we can check for you. But basically, we've been contacting all Flex sites and moving them over to the optimized system templates. And that's where you get a lot of the new features that we're implementing, such as gzipping, stuff like that. What I will say is that if you are a template developer, definitely take in mind of the things that I'm talking about in terms of a lot of times when sites have a template developer, they tend to add more external widgets and external services to their sites because you can. You should be the types of sites who are very closely looking at your metrics and at your page load times, sorting by, again, the things that take up more time. And you should be the ones that are really looking closely at the types of things that you add to those pages and how much weight they are adding to your page and time they're adding to your page. So you can be looking at that network tab on the DevTools and just seeing the types of services that you use and how much you're, quote unquote, paying for in terms of size and speed and whether or not those things are worth it.
Great, this looks like it's the last question. Do disabled blocks affect page load speed?
They don't. There is a perhaps microscopic amount that I think they add a div to the page, but I would say that it's so minuscule that we would say no.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk about how to stay connected to townnews.com. As always, our doc site is a great resource of tons of guides, articles, and helpful tips, and that is at help.blockcms.com. Or head over to our customer support. They're always here to help. They can be reached at 800-293-9576 or at support.townnews.com. The partner community is a great place to ask questions and share ideas with fellow BLOX CMS users and the townnews.com staff. And that is at community.townnews.com. And be sure to follow us on our social accounts, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. To receive updates on software releases, webinars, the townnews.com bulletin, and much more, visit the News tab on townnews.com and sign up for our email alerts. The sign up can be found on the right-hand side of the page. Looks like we haven't gotten any other questions in, so I think that's it for this webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and we will talk to you next month.
Thank you.